Erev Tov, everyone, and welcome to the House of Seven Beggars. It is Monday night. Monday night. It is 8 p.m. 8 p.m. here on the East Coast of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the House of Seven Beggars, and therefore it must be Zeyde Story Corner. That's right, Zeyde Story Corner. Okay. Good to have you all here. Let's see, we got Shlomo and Marsh and Guy and Kelsey Lynn in the chat room, and people are shuffling in as we speak. Good to have you all here, even with missiles raining down on our people in Eretz Israel, and we pray for their safety. We are going to be continuing reading the book, or from the book, Classic Chassidic Tales by Meir Levine. And some little horse. Yes, I am. I've got a bit of a cold going, and yeah, I'm a little hoarse, a little stuffy, and stuff like that. Don't give it to me. Never mind. Okay. So you are going to pick up where you left off last week, and you have the two princes that were switched. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was the two princes that were switched at birth, and who wandered into the forest. One chasing a cow, and one chasing a horse. Yeah, a horse. Of course. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Prince Perez has joined us. Okay, so I guess we should get you onto your camera, and I'm going to apologize if I keep clearing my throat. But let me get you on your camera, and then we can start with the story. Okay, there I am. Okay, there we go. That's much better, isn't it? Okay. Now, if you remember, we were reading the story, The King's Son and the Servant's Son. Now, remember, we talked about this a little bit already, that they had been, an old woman had switched them at birth, and the one became the king, and the other one he got driven out of the country. And anyway, they start and they end up having to chase their animals all over the place to try and capture them. And they get further and further into the forest, and they finally meet up. So let us find out what is going on with these two. Remember, they came upon this. Well, let's see. Now, first they said it was a small man, and then they said it was a gnome, and then they said it was a wood sprite. They cannot make up their mind, but that's where we are at. So, when the wood sprite came to them, the prince said, now remember, the one had already sold himself as a slave for some bread. The one who was the king but wasn't really the king because he was the gardener's son. What is the cause of the laughter that comes at dawn? Remember, every dawn there was laughter. Oh, said the little man, that is only day laughing at night, for at that hour night asks the day, why is it that when you come, I can no longer have a name? And then the day laughs, and it is day. That is the laughter that is heard at dawn. Still, the prince wondered. During the day, they had great pleasure, eating and drinking. The prince leaned on the pillows, and the slave served him. Then they slept. But that night they were awakened by the voices of beasts. They heard the booming of the lion. Oh, I like this story. The panther's shriek, the twittering and crying of birds, and the calls of all the wild creatures in the forest. The sounds of the beasts and the birds became louder and wilder. Never before had there been such a furious noise of howling and barking and roaring and shrieking all together. The men listened, but after they had listened well a while, they were no longer terrified by the sounds. Do you hear? The prince asked. It is something like a song. They listened, and at moments the howling and shrieking and roaring came to them as a strange and beautiful song. They listened more eagerly, and the song became clearer. And each moment it became more beautiful until to hear it was a pleasure greater than all the pleasures that men know on earth. Can you imagine that? The melody was so wildly beautiful that they wanted to remain there forever listening. Then the servant begged the prince to ask the wood being, oh, now he's a wood being, okay, what sort of music it was that they heard. And when the little man came back into the room, the prince asked him, where does that singing come from? The sun has woven 2 silver gowns for the moon, the wood being said, and therefore all the creatures of the wood are singing. For you know that the moon is their friend, since the moon lights their way at night, when they must go forth in search of food. And so they made a beautiful melody for the moon. Oh, how nice of them. I have never heard anything so wonderful as their song, the prince said. Haven't you? Cried the gnome. Oh, now he's back to being a gnome again. Then listen. I have a flute that was given to me by my father, who had it from his father, who had it from his father before him. It is made of strange reeds and wondrous leaves, and you have only to touch any bird or beast with the wand, and the creature will begin to sing the music that is more beautiful than this. Just then, the laughter came before dawn was heard again, and the whole world laughed, and day came. The little man went out of the room. Then the prince cried, I would like to have that magic reed he spoke of. And he arose and searched every corner of the chamber, but could not find the wand. When the prince had finished seeking, the gnome returned and said, It is time that you return to the world of men. How can we go there? Said the prince. I'll show you the way, the gnome answered. Then the little man took the magic flute with him, and he led them out of the house that hung in the air over the morass of snakes and scorpions. Do you remember that from back in the other day? Back to dry earth. "Which way shall we go?" asked the prince. "Go to the land of the foolish people with the wise king, for there you will come into your right," he said to the prince. "And with your servant you will know how to deal." Then he took the reed from his pocket and gave it to the prince, saying, "This is for you." The prince took the flute with delight and looked about for an animal who he might touch with the wand, that they might again hear the song of the wild creatures. But he could not find a single beast. "Now you must go," the wood sprite said. "Which way shall we go?" asked the prince. The little man raised his arm and pointed, and they went that way. They went a long time through the wilderness until seeking some animal who might be made to sing, but they saw no living creature. At last, the prince and his servant came to the land of the foolish people with the wise king. The kingdom was girt around by a high wall, and there was only one gate in the wall through which strangers might pass into the kingdom. They followed the wall for a long time until they came to the gate. But the guards at the gate would not allow them to enter, for the king of the country had died. And though his son who ruled after him was learned when compared to other men, he was so little wise when compared to his father, that the country was now called the land of wise people with a foolish king. And the former king had commanded that only the man who could again make the country known as the land of the foolish people with the wise king should be crowned to succeed him. So no one was allowed to enter the country unless he undertook to make it the land of the wise king. "Can you do that?" the guards asked of the prince. "How can I do that?" thought the prince, and he was afraid to try. His slave said, "Let's go home." But as they stood there, another stranger riding a horse came and stopped by the gate to the kingdom. Then as the prince saw the horse, he thought, "Now I can try the magic flute." And he ran up and touched the horse with the reed. At once the animal began to sing wildly sweet song of the beast, and all who heard it were astonished. I don't know why. I sing all the time. Nobody seems to be astonished at that. Anyway, back to the story. The stranger who rode the horse cried, "Sell me that magic reed." But the prince would not part with it. "Fool," said the stranger, and he was on one who was known to them, "of what use can the reed be to you? You will go out making jokes with it, and perhaps someone will give you a gulden for your folly. Rather become a man than a child. I have a thing I can give you in exchange for the wand." "And what is that?" asked the prince. "I can give you the secret of understanding the meaning of things within the thing. It is a secret that was given to me by my father, who had it from his father. who had it from his own father before him, and I have never told anyone." The prince was satisfied and gave the man the flute. And the man went aside with him and taught him to know the meaning that is at the heart of each thing. And when the prince understood how one thing comes from another, he returned to the gate and knew that he must go in and try to give back the land to its former name. So he was taken before the court of noblemen, who were the judges of wisdom. And they said to him, "Know that we ourselves are no fools. But the king who died was so marvelously wise that against him we were as fools, and the country was called the land of foolish people with the wise king. When the king died, he left a son who was no simpleton, but against our wisdom he seemed as simple as a fool. So the land was changed and called the land of the wise people with the foolish king. Now, whoever brings back the former name may be crowned our ruler. But if you would test your wisdom for this task, you must go into the garden that was left by our wise king." He was told that the king's garden was a wondrous place where things of gold and silver grew, but that since the king's death, no man had been able to remain in the garden. For as soon as he entered, it was... I think you went one too many. Yeah, I think I did. I think I went one too many pages there, yeah. Okay, so for as soon as he entered, he was pursued. And he would run and run faster, but he would be pursued until he ran out of the garden and pursued until he was far away. "Who is it that runs after him?" asked the prince. "No one knows. No man has ever seen the pursuer in the garden. But those who have tried to remain there have come running from the place, scarcely alive." "Are they beaten by the pursuers?" the prince asked. "They are not badly beaten, but they are frightened and ill with running." The prince was taken to the garden. He saw there was a wall around it, with a wide open gate in the wall, for such a garden needs no guards. And as he was about to enter the garden, the prince noticed a statue that stood outside the gate. He went up to the statue and saw that it was the image of the king. And on the stone it was written that the king had lived long ago, and there had been a war until his reign, and war after his reign. But while he reigned, there had been peace. Then the prince, who understood the meaning within each thing, knew that this statue would protect him, and that if he were pursued, he had only to come near the statue, and he would be safe. He knew also that if he caused the statue to be brought into the garden, there would be no more pursuit in the garden. He went to the gate and saw a strangely beautiful place. there all the trees and flowers and grass that grew were of gold and silver and other precious metals. But at once he felt himself being pursued. So he went and stood near the statue, and the noise of his pursuers was gone. And he had not been touched, but was calm and safe. Then the prince called his slave and told him to take the statue into the garden. And now he walked about in the midst of the garden, and all was peaceful and calm. When the noble judges came, he led them into the garden, and they saw that he had brought peace into the place. Truly, they said, you have proven your wisdom. But for this proof alone we cannot make you our king. There is another thing you must do. And they took him into a great room in the palace. High at the end of the room stood a throne that was richly carved of precious wood. Upon the throne were carved all the beasts and the birds that lived within the kingdom. Before the throne there was a couch, and near the couch stood a table, and on the table was a 7-branched candelabrum. 7 ways went out from the throne, and upon each way there stood a marvelous beast or bird. On one path there stood a lion. I told you I like this story. A lion of gold. On another, an ivory panther. A silver eagle was upon the third, and so on each way there stood a different creature. In former times, the nobleman said, the king sat upon his throne, and the candles burned, and he looked down these 7 ways and saw all the ends of his kingdom, and knew all that was happening with all that might take place. And each night, when the moon arose, the beasts and the birds that guard the 7 ways would raise their voices and sing a wildly sweet melody. But now the king is dead. The candles do not burn. The paths are dim, and the beasts have become ferocious, so that no man may come near them, but they open their mouths and swallow him. Then the prince, who understood the meaning within each thing, went up to the carved throne, and looked well upon it, and saw that it was made of the same wood as his magic flute. And he saw that the throne was perfect except for a small piece that was missing from a carved creature at the top of the chair. Then he knew that the former king had taken that piece from its place and hidden it, wisely knowing that when a wise man would come, he would find each thing and put each thing again in its proper place. So the prince looked about the room. He looked behind the throne and found the missing piece and put it back in its place. Then he sat upon the throne. The prince looked at the table before him And so that it was moving a hair's breadth from the center point where all the 7 ways came together. And he ordered his slave to place the table back where it had belonged. And then he saw the 7-branch menorah had been moved. And when that was placed in the center of the table, the candles burned again. And by their light, the prince saw that each of the creatures that stood in the 7 ways had been moved a hair's breadth from his place. And he ordered them to put them back in their proper places. Then, when all things were restored to order, it was midnight, and the beasts and the birds all opened their mouths and began to sing the wild, sweet melody of all the creatures sing to the moon. The prince was crowned king, and then he said to his servant, "Now I understand that I was truly born the son of a king, and you were born the son of a servant." And that's the end of that story. Okay. So, we are at about a halfway point. So why don't we take our break now, and then when we return, we will continue on with the next story, which is called "The Wind That Overturned the World and the Kingdom of Money Worshippers." So, you all stay tuned, and when we come back, we will start the next story. So, everybody, stay where you are. We will see you in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back. Okay, let's check back into the chat room and see who we got in here. Shlomo and Marshall and Guy and Kelsey Lynn and Prince Perez and Miriam Yaakov and Donald Willinger, Claire Bennett, Miles is here, and we got somebody named Cassius Clay. Oh, I know. Wasn't that the name of Muhammad Ali? That's right. That was Muhammad Ali's name before he changed it. Yeah, okay. So good to have you all here, and we will be continuing on with our story. Now, this one is called The Wind That Overturned the World and the Kingdom of Money Worshippers. Okay, so we begin. In a place beyond the habitations of man, there lived a master of prayer. His house was hidden in the forest. There was a body of water in his domain, and by the water grew fruit-laden trees. There he passed his days, singing in joyous worship of heaven. Sometimes he would leave his retreat and go into the world of men. He would approach one person or another and began to talk with him. Mostly, he would speak to humble workmen and tradesmen, but rich men too had heard him. "What do you live for?" he would ask. Some would answer, "To eat and to drink." Others would answer, "To die." But the master would prove to them that man lived only for joy, and that man owed his joy to heaven. "Come with me," he would say, "and I will show you how to live." Now, who do you think they're talking about, huh? Sure sounds like the Baal Shem Tov, huh? Okay, we go to the story. One by one, he brought people to his place in the forest. They bathed in the water. They ate of the fruit. They sang, and their worship was purest joy. The master knew the needs of each of his followers. Those who had been poor were sometimes given garments of gold, and the rich were happy in beggars' rags. But in the world of men it came to be known that there was a master who caused men to leave their wives and their brothers while they followed him. So a great cry was set up that the master must be captured. This they could not do, for he cleverly disguised himself, once as a merchant, another time as a soldier, a third time as a wanderer. No man could tell who he was until the master had won the man to his will. And already among the master's followers there were some who lived so perfectly in his ways that they too went among men and brought away people to live as they lived. In that time there was a strange kingdom inhabited by a people who believed only in riches. Among them, a man was judged according to the sum of money that he possessed. Each year, each citizen would tell the measure of his possessions and accordingly receive his rank. Those who had no money, or very little, might not even call themselves men, but were ranked as beasts and birds. Some were dogs, some were cattle, some mules, and they had to serve those who had gold. The richer might call themselves men, and if they had a great sum of money, they were noblemen. And if they had a still greater sum, they were kings. There, no one had any thought but to get riches. Thus, a dog wanted to become a horse, and a horse a lion, a lion a man. Now, I can't understand that. Now, why would you want to go beyond being a lion? Yeah, who knows? Anyway, and a man a nobleman, and a nobleman a king. They knew no right or wrong, except the right of riches, so that the country was filled with thieves and bandits, who sought to become kings by stealing money. The noblemen and kings employed great armies of men-beasts as soldiers to protect their treasuries. But nevertheless, the land was filled with theft and violence. When the master's followers heard of the country, they said, Let us go there and see if we can win the people from their folly. So a band of them came to the land where money was worshipped. They could not find anyone who would stop and listen to them. But at last they spoke to a poor little creature huddling naked in the street. He was not even a man, but he was of the rank of a sparrow. As they began to speak of the folly of riches, he cried, "I have no time to listen to you." "What have you to do?" they asked. "I must prepare to go on a journey, for we have heard of a land where gold may be made out of the earth," he said. "There I too may become a king or even a god, according to our laws. Who knows? I may yet win the rank of a star, and I may become supreme being the moon. For it is the moon, you know, that makes gold on earth." Seriously, the moon makes gold on earth? I did not know that. Okay. "And if you get enough gold out of the earth, I may become the moon, and then I can make all the earth into gold." "Where is this land?" they asked of him. "It is among high mountains, far from the other people of the world. But we will build our cities on the peaks of those mountains, and make strong walls so that none may enter and steal our gold. And there will be but one secret path upon each mountain leading to each of our cities. And there I, too, may become a god." With these words, he ran from them, and they saw that all the people were leaving the city. The disciples returned to their master and told him of the kingdom of folly where rich men called themselves stars and moons and even gods. The master cried, "I had feared that they would call themselves gods." And he determined to go to the new domain of the money worshippers and try to rid them of their folly. He came to the guards who stood at the foot of the mountain and began to speak of the folly of worshipping riches. But the guards, who were only the rank of hounds and wolves, were filled with the desire to get gold and to become men. They could not listen to the master, but could only stare at the portraits of their kings and gods, which they always carried about with them. For the love of riches was grown so deep that they could not imagine a world where things might be otherwise. Then, seeing that it was of no use to speak with the guards, the master went by them. He passed through the secret path, up the mountain, and came to the city. In that city were many merchants who often journeyed through the world to trade with other peoples. And on such voyages they had heard of a master who stole men from their accustomed lives, but could not himself be caught. And now, as the master went up to one man and another in the city and spoke, he found none who would hear him, for their folly was so deeply grown. Nevertheless, it was soon whispered that the master of dangerous words had come into the city. "How did he come here?" they cried, but none could tell. And he was so cleverly disguised that he could not be caught. Meanwhile, these same merchants brought news of a great warrior who went from one nation to another conquering. And was his custom that when he came within 50 miles of a city to send his warriors with a message demanding surrender. If the people submitted to his will, he did their city no harm, but marched further. But if the city would not surrender, he made war and slaughtered its people. "This same conqueror is coming towards our mountains," the merchants cried. And all the money worshippers were terrified that he would take away their riches. But the merchants said, "It is not gold that he seeks, only power over the world." Then they were afraid for their lives, for they could not surrender their city to an infidel who did not believe in riches. And if they did not surrender their city, he would kill them all. They prayed to their rich men gods, and they took little beast men and bird men and burned them upon altars before these gods. But the sacrifices were of no avail. The warrior came near to the kingdom. "Where shall we turn for help?" they cried. Then one merchant, who had traveled far, said, "There is a land where every man is a god. Surely they can help us." And he told of a country whose people were so rich that the poorest among them was rich enough, according to the measure of the money worshippers, to be a god. "Even their streets," he said, "are of a degree of angles, for their mounts are studded with jewels so rich as to make them of angels' rank. Let us send emissaries to these gods and beg them to help us." The master heard their plan and thought, "I will go once more to the mountain cities and try to draw the people away from their folly." Then he came again and began to speak with the guard. But the guard could talk of nothing but the terrible conqueror. "You have no power against him," the master said. "We have sent emissaries to the land where men are gods, and those gods will help us," the guard said. Then the master laughed. "But they are only men like yourselves," he exclaimed, "and they cannot help you at all. Leave off your foolish talk of gods. And there is only one God, and rich and poor alike are alike to him, and only he can help you against the conqueror." At first the guard would not listen to him, but as he continued to speak, the guard said, And what if I listen to you? I am only one. Then the master was pleased, and he went to another guard and talked to him until that guard said, And what if I listen to you? I am only one. So he went until he had spoken to all the guards, and they had answered him. When he went into the city, and after he had talked for a long while to a man in the city, the man also said, And what if I listen to you? I am only one. Thus, because the people were terribly afraid of the conqueror, the master was able to make them listen to him. But each time they spoke of the conqueror, he said, What conqueror? Can it be the same hero whom I knew at the court of the king? At last it came to the ears of the gods who ruled the city that the famous master was among them, talking to the people. They ordered that he be captured and brought before them. And though he disguised himself in many different ways, he was caught and brought before the gods. And to them also he said, What folly is it to send to the kingdom of gods for help? They are only men like yourselves, and can do no more than yourselves. For no man can stand before the conqueror. What do you know of him? They asked. I know, he said, for there was a hero in the court of a kingdom who I served. The king possessed a marvelous image made in the form of a hand, perfectly made, with all 5 fingers, and with the markings of the faint and the deep lines that are found on the human hand. And by these markings one might see the form of every land in the world, as it had been from the beginning of creation, and as it will be at the end of time. And on that hand one might see all that would happen to each country and each city, and to every man. For the lines and the markings upon the hand were signs by which one might read. And the rivers and the waters of all the places were shown there, and the highways that went from one place to another, and even the hidden ways were shown there, so that from the hand I was able to know the secret path into your own city. And by that hand I knew the secret path into all your other cities. And I know the ways from this world into other worlds. And I know the ways that lead up into the heavens. For there is one way by which Eliyahu went from the earth to heaven, and there is another way that Moshe went, and Henoch went by still another path, and they were all marked upon the hand. There too one might see the fate of cities as they were, and are, and shall be. I have seen Sodom as it was before it fell, and as it is now. And I have seen your city. And so I have seen your emissary go out to the city where all the men are gods, and I have seen that your emissaries and the men of the city too will come to a woeful end." When the elders heard him speak in this way, they thought, "Surely no man can have imagined such a thing, and it must all be true." They looked on their own hands, and they were covered with lines, the mysterious markings. "Bring us to the king who possesses the wondrous hand," they cried. "Perhaps he will show us where to find gold." Then the master smiled. "Still you think of nothing but gold?" he said. "Think rather of how to save yourselves, for gold is of no worth to that king." But they cried, "Nevertheless, bring us to him, and we will believe as you believe." Then the master said, "I do not know myself where the king is to be found, and I will tell you that is so. Once I lived in the court of this king. He had a queen and an only daughter, and the king sought a husband for his daughter. Now, in the king's court there were 6 ministers: the sage, who was the master of all wisdom, and the keeper of the marvelous hand; the counselor, who was the master of words and melodies; the champion, who was the dear friend of the king, and each carried with him a portrait of the other and looked upon it when they were separated. For in each portrait was such a power that to look upon it was to grow love for him that was pictured there. The 4th minister was the treasurer, in whose keep were the staff of jewels, and the cap of precious stones, and all the treasures of the king. The 5th minister was the warrior, and to him the king had given the marvelous sword. For this sword had 3 powers. If it were raised against the enemy, all the leaders of the enemy fled. But if the army of the enemy tried to do battle without its leaders, one had but to lean the sword sideways, and the enemy fell dead. And if it was leaned to the other side, the enemy withered, and their skins dried and fell from them. And I, the master of prayer, was the king's 6th minister. And that is where we are going to stop for this week. And we will pick up with that story when we come back again next week. I hope you will return to be with us then. And until then, don't forget, Wednesday night is the Torah study with Rabbi A and Reb Reuven. And Friday night is Kabbalat and Ma'ariv, the Shabbat. And Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. is Shachrit and Musaf. So until next week, my dear friends, we will say, Laila Tov.
Thank you.